So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and we return, after a while it must be said, to the Temple of Melkor. Now the map is called the Temple of Melkor. Now there has been several versions of this map in the past. I was wondering if this was going to be the one with the ashen landscape, but it is not. This is the newer, I believe, version of this one. Now I am a little bit nervous because this is obviously a map that includes an awful lot of these fences. This is a cityscape map where the primary method by which they've made it so the buildings have collision is by blanketing the map with these fences, which in the past has proven to be a bit of a problem for Medieval 2 itself. Hopefully that won't be the case this time around, but the only way to be sure of that is, well, the only way to find out about that is to actually play the map. So we'll see, fingers crossed. My new PC certainly won't be the problem with this one. It will be the game itself that breaks first, but we'll see. I mean, this is an edited version of the map as it was before, although in the past, obviously on the action version, the attackers would start over there. Now, the deployment zones, it must be said, are a little bit bizarre in the sense that they start over here, already occupying part of the settlement. On this occasion, though, it's going to be the forces of evil that are once again on the attack, trying to reclaim the Temple of Melkor from the forces of good that have managed to wrest control of it away. Must be said, this isn't an awfully long 3v5, so it's going to be quite an aggressive, a fast and frenetic affair, I would assume. We shall see how they do. I mean, to be fair, I don't know if it is good versus evil necessarily, because we've got Cardolan, Umbar, and who else is it on the defence? No, that's Cardolan. And Imladris. So have Umbar had a change of heart? Possibly. It might be all orcish factions on the attack. We'll have to wait and see. It's going to be interesting though, this for the defenders, because they don't have the advantage in terms of elevation necessarily. They're going to have to fight across all levels of elevation if they're going to get the most out of this one. I mean, there are some really nasty defensive points that you can take advantage of. In the past, when we've seen this version of the map, it must be said that it's mostly happened right on the front line we see now. Everything has been committed in, and it's all been decided in a very upfront and personal manner. So I don't know, I mean, maybe that's going to be the case again, given the fact that it's not the longest battle ever, but we'll see. I don't know. It all depends really on how the defenders want to handle it. The attackers, things are very simple. They move forward and try to destroy the enemy. For the defenders, they have to pick the right ground in order to do that, especially in a 5v3 such as this. But anyway, we'll start going through the attacking armies, I think, of which there are many. And no, it's not good versus evil. We're going to have a mad mix of all different types of forces today, so it's just going to be people going mad, I guess, mad over the remains of Melkor's power. But yes, we have Arthedain played by DF John. Arthedain, a very well balanced force. Their infantry is more of a workhorse than anything else. Their real power lies elsewhere, but upgraded Arthedain pikemen, Arthedain men-at-arms with a single level of armour upgrades as well. Obviously, if you're in the attacking forces, when it's a 5v3, you're going to have to cut corners somewhere, and only going for the one level of armour upgrade is one such example of that, I think. But it is still enough to bulk up the Arthedain men-at-arms a little bit and just sustain them on that front line a little bit more, especially under the kind of range pressure that Umbar and Imladris' archers may well want to put them under. We also have the bodyguard sword and board unit that Arthedain can bring, the dismounted knights of Numinous, obviously a very dangerous, a very dependable unit of upper end line infantry. This baking them into the main front line will allow it to last significantly longer. Some dismounted Fornoster Rhine knights as well, a nice unit of shock infantry. This a nice heavy swordsman against the kind of forces they're facing off against today. It will allow them to go toe to toe with the elves a little bit more so, in conjunction with the heavy armour that these human units wear. It will also put them above and beyond most of what Cardolan can field in a melee capacity. And then Umbar, we'll get onto Umbar later. Dunedain Peacekeepers, a really good unit at dealing with more lightly armoured foes, but I don't really know if they're going to be too efficient against most of the enemy forces today. They'll be pretty good against Cardolan, but against Umbar and Imladris, the quality and the armour that both of those factions bring means the Peacekeepers might not actually be as effective as they would otherwise be. And then there are also some Troll Slayers hidden there, not too surprising, they're obviously fantastically effective when it comes to dealing with armour. So Umbar and Imladris will be worried about the Troll Slayers, both at range and in melee with those two-handed axes. And then there's some Ebendim spearmen and archers over here as well, the militia class units for Arthedain. As far as a militia spear goes, the Ebendim spearmen, ever since vanilla 3rd Age, when they were simply the Arnor spearmen, they've always been an effective unit for their class. They've always been one of the better units at their level, and that is no different now. They've managed to maintain that after all these years. And the Ebendim archers, kind of similar. You know, when it comes to skirmishing, the attackers will always use lower tier archers to whittle the enemy down. The Ebendim archers will be very good at that. Their sister kingdom in Gondor, we have the Fountain Guard. They're going to go a little bit heavier, I would assume, in terms of their infantry. They have a bit more of a focus around such things, especially when it comes to slower burn infantry, as it were, with stuff like pikes and polearms, as we can see here. Fountain Guard and Guards of Osgiliath, the Fountain Guard offering that armour piercing, which is nice for them. Pelagian Marines are in there, so javelins. They're very much a middle-of-the-road kind of javelin unit, this. They're not cheap enough to be used as a throwaway javelin unit like Orc javelins are, but neither are they high-tier enough to be that real destroyer of worlds like something like the Demons of the Desert or Ferodran javelins can be. Some upgraded Gondor archers, again, a good choice for trying to whittle down the enemy, especially with the armour upgrade, because it's going to make them just that little bit more resilient to counter skirmishing from the defenders. We have a couple of units of Gondor militia infantry as well, so saving a little bit of money. Gondor militia infantry, unlike the vast majority of other human militia units, are armed with a sword rather than a spear, which will make them more effective in melee against other infantry, but it does mean that they're going to be a little bit less defensively savvy, and also it means that they can't deal with cavalry quite so easily, but then that's not going to be too much of a concern. In a map like this, you would imagine, with its narrow streets, even if the defenders have brought cavalry, it's going to be much more difficult to use. Citadel Guard, Nimlothian Honour Guard with some armour-piercing spear options. Obviously, Nimlothian's very scary. And then some upgraded Gondor infantry and Gondor spearmen as well, which are going to be quite dependable in this kind of situation. Gondor militia archers as well, so a similar approach here perhaps to how Arthedain have decided to stack up. Then we have Y2K86 playing as Angmar, a very nice faction to have when you're on the attack, just because of how robust they are and how difficult they are to stop once they get going. Snargerstalks are hidden. We've got the Trolls, both units of Trolls. We've also got some Witcher-on Pikemen with the armour upgrades, as well as the Guardians of Cardolan with the armour upgrade, so splashing the cash a little bit on their mainline units here. Some Gundabad Guard are in and amongst all of the Guardians of Cardolan as well. The Witcher-on Blackguard and the Blackwatch Legion here at the back, so the Great Shield unit, and then obviously the Sword and Board Bodyguard unit as well. Having a look elsewhere, Goblin Band are hidden. I'd be very surprised if there wasn't at least one unit of Barrow Rides hidden somewhere as well, but no, Witcher-on Hammer Guard, which is an interesting omission given the armour piercing. Would be very useful against a fair few of the defenders, but no matter, Angmar have got plenty of options anyway in that regard. Then we have the Wound Raider, the player who sent me the battle replay, so thank you to him. He is playing as Isengard, another good faction to be when you're on the attack, just because of how well balanced they are as an orcish force. We have the Half-Orc Spear Guard, which they're the unit of more mobile anti-cavalry that Isengard have access to. As a unit of spears, they're going to be dependable as well, decent at keeping themselves alive, shielded, but of course the Spear Malus coming into effect with them, so they're not going to be quite as effective when it comes to killing enemy infantry, but that's exactly what the Uruk-hai infantry are for. One of the better mainline line infantry units that you can mass up in such numbers in the game. When it comes to dealing with stuff like Imladris and Umbar, obviously they have higher tier options which are more expensive and better, but again, they're more expensive, so the Uruk-hai infantry in this sort of situation can be significantly more cost effective, and they're just a really good all-round unit. They're good at dealing damage for a line infantry unit, good at keeping themselves alive with the Uruk-hai armour and the shield that they have access to. They're more expensive than a fair few other line infantry units, to be fair. When you compare them to stuff like the Gondor infantry, they're more expensive, but then when you twin them with the Uruk-hai pikes, which are over here, they make for a very, very effective and very dependable front line. Snaga skirmishers, I mentioned earlier, Pelagian Marines are just a little bit too expensive to be considered throwaway javelins and going to be useful no matter what. Snaga skirmishers very much will be useful no matter what, even if they absorb nothing but ammunition and don't do any sort of damage. They're cheap enough to the point where that is a worthwhile thing for the attackers. Dunlending Clansmen and Half-Orc Baneguard, so more of a half-orc presence than anything else from Isengard here. The mighty Nazkai armour piercing going to be very useful, as we've already mentioned, and the Trolls of the White Hand as well. Hopefully the Trolls for Isengard won't be a flash in the pan, same with Angmar. Uruk-hai crossbows, I mean crossbows could be really devastating too, but positioning is everything with them. The defenders really don't want to be allowing the crossbows into place. And finally, Medex are playing as Khazad. We've already seen Khazad recently on Tolfalas be on the attack and be a real menace. They were the ones that closed the victory out for the attackers on that occasion. The quality and level of survivability Khazad bring to an attacking force is quite a scary thing. We've got a couple of units of Orc Hunters which can pressurise the enemy from afar. In fact, 3 units of them, so not an insubstantial amount at all. 4th Legion Shield Guard without the armour upgrade, but they don't necessarily need it in this sort of situation. They're plenty tanky enough anyways. And then down here the rest of their army, and we can see some Dwarven Miners, so actually going more numbers heavy than I would have expected. We've also got the 3rd Legion Infantry over here, a really strong unit of line infantry, the more expensive option that Khazad have in this regard. And then some 4th Legion back here as well. Warriors of Khazad are the more basic option. But yeah, more numbers heavy than I was expecting Khazad here, especially given that on Tolfalas they went fully in for their quality. But on this occasion, 4th Legion, Warriors and the like. Over here is where the higher end units are going to be, I would imagine. We've got the Legion Bodyguard in there. We have the Hammers of Gondor. Is that the Legion Bodyguard? I think, are they not just officers? I don't know. Hammers of Gondor, Sentries of Khazad. Is there a multiple HP unit here? I'm not sure there is, actually. Kind of hard to see. There's some 2nd Legion, maybe, some 3rd Legion. Very interesting. Not the sort of custom army I was expecting at all, really. They don't have any of the really expensive stuff, but far more numbers, and obviously basic Dwarven units that can be so cost effective in this situation. I think that's that may actually be the way to go. We shall see, however. Starting off then with the defenders, we have Son of the Dunedain playing as Umbar, so the Dunedain's evil counterparts from the south. We have Arthedain Shield Guard, which in this sort of situation, because of their locked morale nature, they're going to be very effective. As a front line, they can definitely withstand a lot of punishment. We've got the Alcarondas Legion, we've got the Naru Sentinels as well, so all of these units very, very strong. The Alcarondas Legion are not locked morale, I don't think, but the other Black Numenorian units around them are. So, yeah, very, very solid upper-end units there. Corsair Blackguards, Javelins, of course, always going to be useful for the defenders if they can be used at the right moment, and the Corsair Blackguards also combine this by being decent auxiliary medium infantry when they're out of ammunition, very much like the Seafarers are for Numenor. Very similar factions overall, of course. Umbar maybe a few more options, but maybe Numenor have got the better high-end stuff. Balagaya Pikemen represent a good anchor that is not quite as important to their defence as the Naru Sentinels are. The Alcarondas Faithful Cavalry that's this expensive and also this defensive in nature. I'm not sure whether this would have been the pick I would have gone for necessarily, but we'll see. It's not capable of doing the same damage that the Warlords are if they do get a nice charge opportunity. And on a map like this is a very difficult map to use cavalry on effectively if you're on the defenders, especially with all of the anti-cavalry that the attackers will bring naturally with pikes and spears and the like. But we'll see. Harbingers of Castamere, a really strong unit of heavy swordsmen. That is going to be, actually I think the general is going to be in the Naru Royal Guard, which are not multiple HP, but are still a very, very heavily armoured archer unit. And then a couple of units of Balakith marksmen over here as well. Really good at trading blows with enemy archers, and they will need to be given the level of opposition they're going up against here. Trebuchet for her Tumihai, going to be in a good position as well for dealing lots of damage, you would hope, for the defenders. They're going to need it to be. Artillery is a little bit of a gamble as well, but less so than cavalry is on a map like this, I would suggest. We've got some Tharbad Warhammers and Dunedain Captains, obviously Cardolan. And their mainline units have got a few morale issues, but with their bodyguard units certainly not. So the Tharbad Warhammers are going to be good against all of the attacking armies today, you would say. So a very, very scary prospect for the attackers, but they are only one unit. But Cardolan have got plenty of armor-piercing options, mostly with regards to their crossbows. The rest of their mainline units are simply going to have to be dependable workhorses with their basic units of Greenway Garrison Footmen, and then backed up by a lot of these Minhiriath men-at-arms. Obviously all of the crossbows are here, men-at-arms are main gatekeepers, and surely the Minhiriath sharpshooters indeed, who double as macemen in melee. Hearthguard of Amon Sul are a fantastic heavy archer, but maybe not the best at dealing damage, and I'd be very shocked as well if the Dunedain Rangers were not here. Castamere's Rangers as well from Umbar. Rangers in this version of the game, after all, very important to the defenders' chances, and a singular unit of Greenway Garrison Spearmen there as well. And last but certainly not least, we have Imladris. Once again, we've seen Imladris as a part of these battle replays a fair bit in the last week or so. Played by Diego Rio Ramos. He has got some God Helene. We've got some Elder Runway archers in there as well, some Mauritania warriors. So the full range of Imladris skirmishers with the Archers of Rivendell included in there as well. So plenty of damage from afar. Gwaithir Myrdain, we have some Elder Runway sword masters also. So some armor piercing and some non-armor piercing shocking units, but all of which are going to be very high quality as you would expect. And then some upgraded Imladris Guardians. On this occasion, unlike last time, we are going to see the Imladris Sentries. Very, very effective unit pikes, of course. All of the defenders bringing their effective pikemen. So it's going to be... if they can position their pikes well, that's going to be one of their building blocks if they are going to be victorious. The defenders. Gwaithir Arthedain, Elder Runway Spearmen also here. Obviously a very strong defensive force that with all of those spearmen. Roinan River Wards, some upgraded swords of Rivendell to round things out, and again a unit of cavalry, which is a risk. I mean, the Gwaithir Rockdor at the very least are lance knights, so if they do have an opportunity for a good charge, they will at least be more effective than the Alcarondas faithful from Umbar. But on a map like this, it's going to be difficult. I mean, these are narrow streets. The terrain is also not exactly favourable for the most part for the defenders, so it's going to be difficult for them to defend effectively on a map like this. We'll see. I mean, that's perhaps why this is such a popular spot to defend on this map, because you do have terrain to take advantage of, but only from one angle, and it does leave you vulnerable from the back if Khazad really get going. So, I don't know. I don't think we're going to be making too much of a cut in this one, because there's not all that many frames for a 5v3. But we'll see. I think the Cardolan force is going to need to hot-foot it over here, and we'll see how much leeway the attackers are willing to give. But yeah, I'll make a cut. However long that may be, and we'll rejoin when the battle is about to get underway. So I think for this one, because it's not an overtly long 3v5, we will just rejoin straight away before the battle is actually joined, because I don't think that it's going to take too long for things to get underway, especially seeing as all of the armies are fairly close to each other right from the off. Angmar going to be leading the way for the attackers over here. The Barrow-wights, of course, move very slowly at the best of times, but this is a very large force when you consider that Angmar are maybe a little bit more numbers heavy than they otherwise would. And then there's also a more militia-focused Gondor and Arthedain in close attendance as well. Moving back over here, so the elves are going to move over to a more defensive position. I don't know what Cardolan are going to be doing either. It doesn't look as though they're in any great rush. We haven't actually seen this back part of the map really utilised in the past all that much. I don't know what Umbar are necessarily going to be doing either, considering it looks as though they're going to be setting up in a defensive position just over here, facing down the hill. So I can only imagine that means Imladris are going to be the ones to possibly take on the dwarves and Isengard as well. All kinds of Khazad actually moving backwards, which is slightly strange. Are we going to be seeing... I wouldn't have thought so. I would have thought that we're still embroiled in a grace period for the time being. Goblin Band are an interesting choice. I mean, we very rarely see the Goblin Band because they actually cost... I mean, they're obviously still a cheap unit, but the amount they cost is significantly higher than something like the Orc Fodder, and they're an equivalent unit, really. Both very, very low-level spears. Umbar are going to be sending some units over there. The Cardolan Trebuchet out of, well, around the corner, really, from all of these enemy skirmishes, and getting up onto this little bit of higher terrain. Is it a pathway? It is a pathway. There's another route around that can be utilised. Cardolan are putting in some of their units now. I suppose this units all the way back there because lots of these, well, under normal circumstances when we've seen this map in the past, this area down here has been contested. Like I said, the terrain is such that generally speaking, the defenders have wanted to keep the attackers down here so they can use the elevation to their advantage, but I don't know go a little bit further back into defensive shape on this occasion. This does mean that this road is also available, so maybe Cardolan feels that the attackers may well want to go the long way round, but I would suggest they probably won't. I think the defenders, I mean, especially seeing as Cardolan, the main bulk of Cardolan's army is so far away, they'd be much better off trying, at the very least, to overwhelm the Umbar and Imladris position and then just leave Cardolan at the back for later. Force Cardolan into moving their army across the field, and as we're already seeing, moving your army across the field isn't exactly a lightning quick endeavour. What is the Trebuchet is moving a long way. This is where they're going with the Trebuchet. But that's only going to be super effective if the attackers start to push the defensive lines back a little bit. As Imladris go into place. It's a fairly solid front line. It's not the most damaging front line you'll ever see. Angmar and Shield Guard may be expensive, but they are expensive more so for their defensive attributes. Then we're going to send a force over to pressurise Cardolan. Like I said, it would, if I were the attackers, I would just send over a token force of like pikes and low-end spears to block this road here so Cardolan can counter-attack into you, but other than that I would commit most of the forces to overwhelming the defenders that are occupying this space here. Arch the Rivendell in place and ready to shoot. I mean, the Orc Hunters are still close enough to return fire. Interesting fight between archers there. The Orc Hunters give Khazad a more damaging archer option than you would expect the dwarves maybe to have. And their armour isn't as high as some of the other dwarven units, but it's certainly still higher than the elven archer that they would be trading blows with if that is to be the play. Imladris spreading themselves out. I mean, it's a fairly wide area for Umbar and Imladris to defend, but between the two of them, they should be able to manage it. But they're going to have to front load quite a lot because of the quality-heavy nature of both of the armies involved. But again, marksmen, I mean, we're going to be seeing things get underway very shortly, I would imagine, given that the Goblin Band are creeping ever further forwards. Arthedain pikemen thinking about, I mean, like I said, just having a couple of units to block an advance would be fine, I think, but they're not going to be blocking anything here. For the time being, I think they're just trying to stay out of range of Cardolan skirmishers, which is fair. I suppose it's a clear place for the defenders to defend here, this final layer. I mean, this is a huge cityscape, it's very easy. I mean, these are the maximum amount of players that Medieval 2 allows, and already you can see that the defenders can get lost in such a big settlement like this. There is, I think, even more, yeah, so this technically is the final stand, this keep back here, this is as far back as you can retreat, and it's quite a long way away from where the front lines are going to be in this battle. Just do have their archers in place. And surely the grace period doesn't need to last too much longer now. All of the attackers are in place, the defenders know what they're doing. Anything else is just minutiae, basically. Little details, which, to be honest, if the defenders haven't sorted themselves out by this point, if you're the attackers, I would say green light to attack, but I'm not in the game. I was a bit surprised, actually, to not see Isengard be the ones to maybe push lower end units forward first. I mean, it would definitely put some pressure on these archers and the like to be pulled back, and this is quite a large area. I mean, with Isengard's slightly higher numbers with dwarven quality, Imladris may struggle, they might need a little bit of help from Umbar. It's a Goblin Band. The rest of the Goblin Band units are moving backwards. I was going to say that was a little bit weird. Some of them going rogue. Dismounted Fornos Knights. Sending over units 2 by 2, which is a little bit weird. I mean, now they're sending over the rest of their force. Some of these buildings don't have collision on them, which which means they can be passed through, which is another good reason why you wouldn't want to defend down here as the defenders. Not back within the settlement anyway. You can see here on the front line, where the front line usually is based on the deployment zones, that they do have collision based on the fences of Angmar, which is perhaps why we've seen this so commonly. Finally some damage. Balakith marksman shooting into this blob. Nothing too important over here though, just basic militia archers, some Snaga. A few kills inflicted, but so it begins. What is likely to be a very violent affair with 20k frames of action still to go. Castamir's Rangers also going to start firing. It's a bold move actually to have the Castamir's Rangers here already. I mean, they're going to do damage quickly, but against units which I'm sure the attackers won't mind being depleted. Forward come the Dunlending clansmen, who are going to take point blank hits from the Archers of Rivendell, and I think more worryingly for them, they're going to get absolutely carved apart by Swords of Rivendell in melee. Dunlenders are going to make it just about to the Archers of Rivendell though. I'm sure they're not going to last too much longer though. The morale is probably going to collapse in short order. Once again, we've seen the Gwaithly Rockdoor in the third battle in a row. The battle for the Mountain Gate that we saw, the Gwaithly Rockdoor were very effective, albeit to, well, as you know, it was the Tolfalas battle where they were very effective. On the Mountain Gate they were less so. It wasn't enough of victory for the defenders either time. It does highlight how important getting value with your cavalry is. Now you can see Swords of Rivendell, they would be able to defeat Dunlenders with ease, but when they're under arrow fire, and warriors of Khazad have also been added to the equation. The Imladris infantry is going to struggle just a little bit. In come the Gwaithly Rockdoor, once again with a charge. Dunlending clans actually standing up. I mean, they're shaken, but they're not looking like they might rout at any given moment. The Goblin Band, the first ones to collide with the Umbar front line. Many of these spears are pointing the wrong way, which is kind of weird. You're going to need to turn around in double quick time. Nara sentinels. I mean, this is an imposing front line, like I said, lots of pole arms, very strong defensively, but actually the trolls will be pretty good against most of these units. There's enough thickness to the Umbar front line, for lack of a better term, that they will still be able to hold this assault at bay for the time being, but the trolls will be pretty efficient against most of these units, trying to put a real dent in these pikes. If the Harbingers were on the other side, things will be a little bit different. There'll be more damage dealing potential there. So far the Snaga being kept at bay, some Gondorian swordsmen moving forwards as well. Thought Warhammers would be the ideal tonic to deal with the trolls. And over here, staring off against one another, the Evendim units, trying to trade blows back and forth, but yeah, I mean, to be honest, like, Cardolan could just move forward a couple of feet. It's not going to expose them any more than they already are. And it would put pressure on the civilians and the Evendims, and with pikes at your disposal, I think you would have the better of that fight if you're Cardolan. But that's just my 2 cents worth. Now, it's over here where things have truly gotten underway pretty quickly. 2 banks, of course, our Blackguards throwing their javelins in. We saw this in the last battle, to an extent, at the Mountain Gate, where the projectiles being used by the defenders were technically doing a lot of damage, but was it against the calibre of unit they needed it to be? The javelins going after barrow wights and looking on pikemen is all well and good, but I feel as though they were throwing their projectiles into the front units, which that's mostly Gondor militia swords. Over here the trolls fighting in amongst things. There's the trebuchet. Close to getting friendly fire there, but for the most part you have to say that did hit their intended targets. Playing with fire a little bit by targeting front line like this, if you're not sure you can hit the enemy. Any friendly fire in a 5v3 like this can be so devastating for the defenders, of course, but those were good hits. I'm not sure what the Melkor's faithful think they're doing. Even if they do fight their way to the front line. There's pikemen involved in the push now. We'll come back in just a second to see the Blackwatch Legion push through, but I think, yeah, a little bit of a lighter assault over here. Still, the attackers not pulling their punches too much, with units being consistently committed to the fight, but Imladris, seeing the threat that they pose, Imladris sentries and some Guardians actually already taking a fair amount of damage. Snaga skirmishers doing their thing, Elven arrows finding their way into the enemy. But yes, let's go and see what's happening over here. Are the Blackwatch Legion having the impact? They are pushing back against the front line. Alcarondas Legion so far holding. The Blackwatch Legion are going to be taking some significant damage as they do this, but they are a little bit tougher than the Blackguard of Barad-dûr, so maybe they can make this work. There's a lot of arrows coming in. This might actually be a good opportunity for the Alcarondas faithful, as they can be committed quickly, and the added mass of cavalry might make it a little bit more difficult for Angmar to engage in this kind of behaviour. Lots of arrow fire coming in as well though, so it's going to be very costly this for the attackers, but putting Umbar under a lot of pressure. Umbar can weather this storm. It's probably a good sign for the defenders. Incoming far back Warhammers to really try and stop the Blackwatch Legion. They are running out of steam, so they're not going to destroy the lines too much, but they have pushed it back a little bit because there's a few Umbar units still left over there, but they're going to get surrounded and overwhelmed. So the front line has been shifted back a little bit, but they did hold on there Umbar, with a little bit of support from Cardolan. Now also Wardens of Tir Gorthad adding up to the front line as well, replacing the Balagai pikemen that are routing another unit of Alcarondas Legion, necessary to keep the front lines all locked down. Some Dunedain Rangers, what are they fighting now? Trying to hide their... Oh, this is a huge blob here. That's definitely working for the Dunedain Rangers. I don't know how many arrows are going to be able to make it that far. It's not the full unit that seems able to shoot there, but it could be absolutely brutal. Still biding their time over here, Arthedain. A few Gondorians on the way across as well, so maybe they're thinking about beginning an assault here for this. In fact, I think I just heard... Yes, indeed. Just heard the units charge forward, Avendim Spearmen colliding with the front line. They're going to need reinforcements very, very quickly. A single unit of militia spears without any kind of backup. Even against fellow militia, the Cardolan forces were better prepared for this engagement, I think. But with Gondor infantry on the way forward, things will stabilise and things will settle into a longer fight over here as well. Over here, Groinen Riverward's victory is almost a certainty. Imladris' quality definitely going to pay dividends against both withstanding the dwarves and butchering the Dunlanders. But over here you can see that this unit of Imladris sentries has been consistently hit by projectiles. A combination of Snaga skirmishers and, more worryingly you would say, the Uruk-hai crossbowmen. Guardians also moving forth. Spreading themselves out across many attacks here. Gondor Spearmen moving forward, but Gondor Spearmen not really the answer to something like Khazad Warhammer's basic Gondorian unit is really going to struggle against a unit like that, so Khazad Warhammer is likely to be racking up the kills. Customers' range is also in a good position here, so I mean this is proving to be a very bloody affair for the attackers. But we can sustain these losses, at least for the time being. If the defenders' front lines start to show any sign of weakness, it's a sign that the battle could be turning around. The Gondor infantry doesn't seem to be enough to turn this fight in their favour, so far the Cardolan pikes most assuredly doing their job. Two arrows flying overhead. deal with the Evendom archers that are in support. Some Arthedain men-at-arms over here, the Arthedain equivalent to the Gondor unit you've seen. With just the one level of armour upgrade though, but so far the Greenway units proving their worth in melee. Need to withstand these assaults resolutely. As God Halim's still firing away. I mean, this is at this stage, this is quite a chaotic engagement, and there are plenty of gaps that have appeared. Of the White Hand able to get in behind enemy lines as well, and they should be able to silence these archers pretty quickly. Crossbow men as well, but the Men-at-Arms and Gatekeepers are more of a threat to the Trolls of the White Hand once they get into melee. The Elder Renway can look after themselves, they don't necessarily have the damage to crack through the armour of the Trolls quickly enough, although the Trolls may be tempted here. The crossbows perhaps represent a bigger threat to the attacking forces, but when you see something like this, when you see a front line which is this stretched with this many gaps in it, you do worry for Imladris in this kind of situation. Imladris sentries marching forwards. Warriors of Khazad starting to struggle a little bit. Another wave of attacking infantry is needed here, because Imladris do have quality to fall back on even in more scatterbrained fights like this. The quality can see you through. One thing that the gaps have resulted in, however, is just really good use of ranged tools by Isengard. Those Snaga and those Urukai crossbowmen able too often, I think, to get good shots and sightlines against the Elven units. A real potential problem. Meanwhile, the front line over here appears to be really flagging, actually, when you look at how many units are still on the front line. And also crossbows, we haven't seen them firing, but they must have been. If they're being committed to melee, then they must have been utilised fairly often up until now. Another force is going to need to be committed here, and I'm not sure the attackers actually have the ability. Gondor militia archers, there's still some guards of Osgiliath, there's still some units way back over there, so the Gondorians still have a little bit more left to give in committing units over here, and they're going to need to. The problem is those ranges have been so devastating, so while Imladris may be struggling a little bit, I think this joint Umbar, well, mainly Umbar with a little bit of Cardolan support on this front line, I think this position has been very well maintained by the defenders. Yes, it was a very aggressive push. We've seen hyper-aggression work for the attackers recently on Tolfalas. That may be an example of it backfiring quite harshly. Arthedain taking the lead over here against a portion of the Cardolan army, and slowly but surely, especially now they've got Arthedain and pikemen on the front line, I would assume they're going to start to be making inroads, and Peugeot also, his Gondor infantry, starting to also see signs of forward momentum. Locked morale for the dwarves is going to make life significantly more difficult for Imladris as well, but it's actually Imladris themselves who are suffering a little bit under the morale strain here. Orc Hunters now able to claim the high ground. Nazkai pushing through with the trolls. I think this Khazad Isengard assault, where perhaps the Angmar Gondor assault failed a little bit, I think this one is succeeding to the extent that they can more than make up for that, and maybe go to the aid of what's left of Angmar as well once they clean things up over here. There are a few more units arriving now, a little bit of support from Cardolan, but Minhiriath men-at-arms are most assuredly not going to be the answer against the hammers of Gondor. Was that friendly fire? I think it was, or at least partially friendly fire. That's the last thing that was needed there, but The artillery got fortunate earlier on with the shots we saw it take. I mean, this is a good opportunity for the trebuchet. If it hits into the centre mass of these units, it can very quickly put a serious dent into the Dwarven and Isengard forces that are pushing forwards. Speaking of which, very nice hits. Hitting those pikemen nicely. Archers of Rivendell being forced into melee service. Some sentries here, some half-orc spear guard getting in the way. It's a very messy fight, this one. You can see here the Nazkai very well suited for taking on armoured units, of which the Elder Enway camp themselves among. Bit of support from the dwarves as well. Manasar Roman Gatekeeper is actually doing very well. Like I said, the armour piercing is going to serve them quite well in a fight against the trolls, but the trolls have kept the gatekeepers from utilising their crossbows, which maybe would help keep the situation on lower ground under control, but as it is, and then the gatekeepers are also going to have to deal in short order with the Nazkai coming for them as well. They need to keep this assault going though, the attackers, otherwise all of these Umbar units will be able to turn around and try to meet the challenge of Isengard and Khazad. Projectiles, Pelagia Marines, trying to do just a little bit more damage to Umbar, and doing damage I think is the best that what remains of Angmar and Gondor over here can hope to do to the defenders. Two very different fates here. This was maybe an easier choke point to defend, Imladris trying to spread themselves out a little bit too wide maybe on the other side, given the smaller army in general in the play. Half-guard Vamon's sword holding the front line now. Again, more of a defensive powerhouse than one that's actually going to do tons and tons of damage, but will hold the front line resolutely enough. Here we have sharpshooters shifting themselves around. Decent certain for the Greenway Garrison footmen now. A very dependable unit for a lower end one, but as soon as things really start to ratchet up in terms of pressure, they do need some quality around them in order to flourish, and I'm sure that's going to be the case here. They're getting consistently pushed back now. Some units of genuine quality moving forward as well with the dismounted Knights of Illuminas. Is there any reinforcements on the way? No, there's crossbows that could very well shoot the Knights of Illuminus if they decide to come around the corner, but how many more units they have? I mean, Arthedain have still got a few units left that they can commit as well, so reinforcements could be forthcoming, so you'd give the edge to the attackers over here, certainly. So of the 3 engagements, the attackers are doing well in 2 of them.
Only half the enemy force
Angmar general falls, but Angmar are also by far and away in the worst shape of the attacking armies at this point, so I don't know how effective that's going to be. I think Umbar have actually siphoned off more and more of their resources to try and halt the advance of Isengard and Khazad Balakith marksmen. They are intended to be a fairly decent sword and board infantry unit once they're out of ammunition, and they're going to have to be here. There's also some 209 captains from Cardolan. I mean, Cardolan sending over so many of their really high quality units over here is what may come back to haunt them in their fight against Arthedain over on the other side of the battlefield.
They have lost half their men.
Brutal. But, as we have a look over here, Isengard continuing to push forwards. So lots of Isengard units as well, trying to take the higher ground. Effectively encircle what remains of Umbar. They'll be able to do with this, and also finish off what remains of Imladris as part of the deal. They need to be a bit careful though. If they send too many of their units over here, Umbar could recover the situation down in this position. This is actually where the Alcarondas faithful could really pay for themselves as well. I wasn't sure about their inclusion earlier on, but now there's a little bit more space, things are a little bit scattered in one of the more open sections of the map. This is where you are going to need to get some good value with your cavalry. They seem a little bit static at the moment, you have to say, but oh well. Balakith marksman Skill is still alive, and they'll be doing well enough. I mean, most of what they're fighting in melee, you have to say, is Corsair crossbowmen, not exactly the kind of unit which is going to strike fear into their hearts. Arrows showering in. Back. Seems certain the military genius can win this battle. Which is surprising, actually, from an Arthedain perspective. Hearthguard of Amon Sul must be doing an awful lot of heavy lifting on this front line with their resilience. Gondor archers managing to leak around the front lines. Hearthguard of Amon Sul still doing their thing. There are dismounted knights of Numinous, however, and the Hearthguard are still holding the front line adequately. The dismounted knights also got some support, but they look bloodied. I can only surmise that the crossbows did get a volley or two into them. And now the crossbows, this is where the crossbows in melee will be very good as well. It looks like they're continuing to try and shoot though, but a few blows from those maces would be enough to surely send these Gondor archers packing. More crossbow bolts. Surely Arthedain have got the numbers to overwhelm the Cardolan defenders over here. Cardolan's full army wasn't over here. Dunedain Troll Slayers taking hits from the crossbows. So I do believe Arthedain is still going to be victorious over here, and given Isengard's momentum over on the other side, Umbar are doing their best to salvage the situation, but I don't think it's going to be possible. Dunedain captains, what remains of the Farbout Warhammer, is easily able to overcome this small group of miners. Trebuchet crew has retreated a bit. Umbar are finding themselves a little bit encircled at this point, you'd have to say. I think they know where best to try and position themselves now. They have a decent force left, but you have to say it is still depleted. With stuff like Citadel Guard on the way, that's not the easiest thing to deal with. And there's the Elven General at long last. Surely the bell tolls for the elves in this battle now. Citadel Guard. Arrows ripping through them. Javelins very much doing the same. Elements of the Arthedain army appear to be breaking here. This aggressive push maybe hasn't saved them. More Dunedain peacekeepers are arriving, but Cardolan crossbows able to look after themselves in melee, and that may prove to be a big difference maker here. Too many of those Arthedain units ending up routing, and as a result, actually, parts of the front line now heading Cardolan's way. The Hearthguard of Amon Sul and the Imperiath able to overwhelm a few of these units. There is a Dunedain captains, or what's left of the Dunedain captains here too. The announcer still favours the attackers, and so do I, based on how the battle has gone up to this point, but it's certainly not out of the realms of possibility that the defenders can turn this around. 57 Troll Slayers though. Need to make up their mind what they're doing quickly though, because they are taking chip damage from the gatekeepers. Actually seems certain. For all of the Guardian crossbows, those maces having the desired effect so far. And yeah, all comes from Khazad. Isengard consolidating their forces with the doors, able to finish off what remains of the Cardolan bodyguard units that we saw just a moment ago. If they can consolidate their forces, they will then be, I'm sure, looking at what they can do about dealing with what remains of Umbar. Umbar, who are kind of counter-attacking actually into the remains of the Gondorian force down this hill. Which is all well and good, but they could find themselves surrounded if they're not careful. There goes the Arthedain General. It's a significant loss actually. Arthedain can't afford to have much more routing than we've already seen. Fountain Guard on the way forward, that's a significant unit for the attackers as well, which Angmar are going to have to try and deal with. And we're getting to the point in the battle now where ammunition is going to be at a premium, and that's going to be the best way for dealing with something like the Angmar. I don't know how many crossbow bolts the defenders in Cardolan have left over here, per se. Peacekeepers, not enough of them. The problem is, as well as Cardolan have done over here, I think it's still going to be a case of whoever wins out over here is going to have next to nothing left, so in the end I'm not certain it's going to make too much of a difference. But no matter. Finally bring down the half-guard man on Saul, who've been such a defensive stalwart over here for Cardolan so far. Isengard making their way through. Passable buildings. Into your pikes as well, which is always a troubling sign, shall we say. Hammers are good about just getting involved. Of course, Umbar will need to kill them off completely. They're not going to rout, so should be doable with all of these MELKOR pikemen marching in, but Khazad's rangers on the way back. See the Umbar forces remain because they're in amongst the dead bodies and the colours are blending together fairly effectively here. I'm actually surprised Khazad's rangers still have ammunition. That could be a bit of a saving grace on par with a few archers that remain. The problem is those archers are not going to have enough ammunition to deal with absolutely everything the attackers still have to work with. Fountain Guard, Warders of the White Tower and other elements of Gondorian forces, pretty much all that remains of Gondor, but it's going to be enough to overcome these forces of Blackguard, surely. Elsewhere, Cardolan outright victorious over here. They're going to be. They're not going to have too much left, but it's something which they can send to the aid of Umbar. Muddy the waters a little bit. It's the sort of thing which means you can't be too sure that the attackers are going to win from here. You can be reasonably sure, given the level of quality of many of their units and how healthy a position they seem to be in the battle. Umbar's faithful doing their best to make use of themselves that cavalry, and the cavalry can be a real game changer. Narskai getting in behind the lines, they're going to try and break up the charge a little bit, and they are going to succeed. Once you get into melee with the Narskai, you need to exit melee with them just as quickly if you're a cavalry unit. Those big hooked Uruk-hai swords are not the sort of thing that you want to be engaging with.
If we continue like this, we will smash the enemy.
Victory seems certain for Gondor still. As the Gondor general, actually. Bloodying his sword and himself. Yeah, I think with this, I think you can be reasonably sure the attack's going to win, even with some support from Cardolan on the way. That is a decent amount of strength that Gondor still possess, and I think it's going to be too much for the beleaguered forces of both Umbar and Cardolan to deal with, especially seeing as they've still got not so much the dwarves are mostly a spent force, but there's a few scary units still from Isengard as well, including pikes, which, when it comes to trying to deal with them purely in melee, you are going to struggle. So there's some Imladris Guardians actually, Imladris, still alive, trying to help Umbar finish off this small group of Uruk-hai pikemen. some Arthedain shield guard that have recollected themselves. Use just about everything. There's still some Imperial men at arms waiting here, but I think they probably realise that the situation is probably lost at this point. There's only 1% the difference. 1% in favour of the attackers, but when you consider what that 1% is made up of, the quality of the units, especially from the Gondorians here, that is maybe a more significant difference than just the sheer numbers. Gondor archers, victory seems certain. Charging in. Probably hoping to fill their boots with a few more kills in the final 2,000 frames of the battle. Hearthguard have showed themselves to be a defensive powerhouse in this battle, you have to say. Doing very well with not even their full strength. Cardolan were able to defeat Arthedain on the other side of the battle. Not enough in the end for the defenders to be victorious, and I think it was over here, to be honest, where the attackers really claimed the momentum in this fight. Imladris spread themselves far too thin with far too small an army, and as soon as the fight becomes riddled with gaps like that and becomes really chaotic, especially if you're a force as small as the elves, going up against the nasty combination of the quality of the dwarves and the numbers and well-balanced nature of Isengard, you're asking for trouble. So it has proven to be. I don't think the defenders have ever really recovered from that. Angmar got dumpstered, you have to say, on the front line here. Not really because of anything necessarily wrong that the attacking player for Angmar did, but going fully aggressive like that has its potential risks, and I think we saw them laid bare in this battle as well, so could have gone either way, this one. Very much a game of ups and downs for both sides. Umbar cavalry still alive. I think the Alpha on this Faithful maybe could have been used a bit more aggressively, and it's possible that he's been making good use of them while we haven't been looking, but for the most part they've just been bumping into units and not really doing a great deal. But then they are melee cavalry. They don't have the same punch as the Warlords of Umbar, which would have been the better choice of the two, like I said. I still maintain that, as much as I think the cavalry, as the battle has progressed, there has been a good opportunity to use them. If you're going to bring cavalry in a battle like this, I think you still need to go for the lance version. Sword cavalry like this is a better tool for the attackers to stop sally outs, I think, or in pitch battles. Hopefully when the next patch comes out we'll see a little bit more in terms of cavalry. Cavalry is probably the most stale aspect, to be honest, of the current version of the game. It's either got multiple HP, it's got some sort of ranged attack, or it's useless. Those are the three options, and generally speaking, multiple HP cavalry rules the roost so much that there's nothing else to be said. Umbar are gone, admitting defeat. Now an Royal Guard would have fought to the bitter end. Son of the Dunanine, seeing that the situation is lost. What remains then? Probably a Cardolan unit somewhere, isn't it? Still. Here we are. This is going to be an admittal of defeat as well, I would assume, unless it's a rout. Cardolan's morale could come back to bite them here, as much as the sharpshooters did very well in the earlier engagement. No, he did admit defeat. They were shaken though against the force they were beating. Classic Cardolan, that. And so there we are, the attackers with a deserved victory in the end, I think. That front line against Imladris, like I said, was really where the attackers were able to stamp their authority on the battle, and a good job done by Isengard and by Khazad in seizing the initiative and really making sure that Imladris couldn't really recover, and from there it was always going to be difficult. If not for that, I think the defenders would have been okay though. Cardolan were able to defeat Arthedain over on the other side, even with a bit of Gondor support and even without their full army, so that deserves, I think, a lot of credit from Cardolan's perspective, albeit they had a very advantageous position with stuff like crossbows to back them up. And Umbar, of course, very similar. They had a very advantageous position, but they were still able to withstand a full-blooded assault from Angmar, which is easier said than done. It can be quite scary when Angmar get going, but if you do deny them that momentum, you can defang them quite a lot. And I think ever since the Blackwatch Legion push failed, Angmar were always really trying to make up for that. They weren't really able to do that, but at the very least, they were able to hold Umbar's attention long enough to the point where their reinforcements weren't really enough to salvage the situation for Imladris as well. So yeah, I think the attackers were the victors in the end because of that, but not too far away from the defenders being able to turn this one around, and it was another battle that was won and lost by very, very fine margins. So let's see what did the damage for Isengard, shall we? Not too surprisingly, the Snaga skirmishers breaking 100 kills. An example perhaps of them being used to very good effect during the gaps that appeared in Imladris' front line. The crossbows doing okay, the Nazkai. You're not going to see huge numbers because this is an attacking army, of course. But the most kills coming from the Trolls of the White Hand, so they must have been used well enough. I mean, we saw them getting in amongst the enemy skirmishers, including Elder Renway. They also stopped the Manatar Roman gatekeepers from firing, but the gatekeepers were able to then kill them off as well, so most of the killing would have been done by the Trolls of the White Hand before we saw that, so fairly early on. But another thing which also would have helped with the fracturing of Imladris' front line. The rest of these units, I mean, some of them not even getting into double digits, which is a sign that the defenders did well in killing off some of them, but enough damage done, you would say, considering the superior numbers of the attackers. Very similar kill counts actually for all the players on both sides. The slight exception to that maybe is the fact that Gondor managed to break 1,000 kills for the attackers, but then they had the quality late on to help finish them off, so that may be where that came from. So yeah, big thank you to the Womb Raider for sending this one in. Big thank you to all the players as well for being a part of this battle replay. As for what's going to be coming up soon, the next one may very well be a battle on the Arthedain outpost. There's another one from the Womb Raider as well, actually, which is a free-for-all in the Mountain Pass, the classic Mountain Pass, which we'll be getting to in the next week or so as well. And moving further forwards, there's still a replay on Silmarillion that I need to be doing. Anything on the next patch, as I've mentioned in the last few battle replays, if I get it, it will be pushed to the front of the queue, but of course that means as soon as I get it, I'll be trying to record it as quickly as possible and then scheduling it for the very next slot, so I can't really talk about that too far in advance, especially now that I'm trying to rebuild a bit of a backlog so that I can, if I do get sent away for work, all of a sudden I have the 3 weeks in the bank that my schedule can keep going as it would normally, even while I'm away. Hopefully it won't come to that, but you never can tell. And yeah, other than that, not really much else to report. We'll, again, the end of the year may very well bring some changes, mostly positive changes I would hope for the channel. But other than that, we shall wait and see what the future brings, I suppose, in that regard. So yeah, big thank you to all the players once again. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.